She thought leaving her parents' cruelty behind would end her battles, but someone has been watching her children, tracking their every move, and the man she's learning to trust may hold the key, or the danger. Every choice could protect them, or destroy everything she's fought for. Who can she truly rely on when the people closest to her hide the darkest secrets? My name is Martha, and I used to think that the word family meant safety, warmth, and belonging. That belief started to unravel years ago, but it wasn't until a single weekend that the final threads snapped for good. I am the mother of 2 children who are my world. Ella, 10 years old, with a thoughtful smile and a gentle voice, and Leo, 7, who laughs in quick bursts and hugs with his whole body. Their father, Daniel, died 3 years ago in a car accident, leaving a hollow ache in all of us. Since then, it has been just us 3, finding ways to fill the silence with board games, pancakes for dinner, and late-night talks under blankets. We have been surviving and, in small ways, healing. My younger sister Sophie has a son, Aiden, who is 8. Aiden is smart and charming when he wants to be, but he also knows that my parents see him as something close to royalty. From the way they talk about him, you would think the boy had cured a disease or climbed Mount Everest. I used to tell myself it didn't matter, that favoritism was just a small bruise in the bigger picture of family life, but I knew my kids noticed. They were polite and never complained, but I saw the way Ella's hands tightened when Aiden was praised for the smallest thing, or the way Leo would suddenly go quiet when conversations shifted to his cousin's latest triumph. It was my mother's birthday when everything truly shifted. She invited us all to their large countryside home for the weekend. I convinced myself it would be good for the kids, a chance to spend time with family, and for me to try to repair whatever cracks existed. Ella saved up her allowance to buy a bouquet of her grandmother's favorite lilies. Leo spent an evening at the kitchen table cutting out paper hearts and sprinkling glitter over a card that read, "We love you, Grandma." Their excitement was pure, their smiles unguarded. When we arrived, I watched them step forward, holding out their gifts like they were offering pieces of themselves. My mother glanced at the flowers for barely a second before saying, "Oh, thanks. Just leave those on the table," and turning her full attention to Aiden, who had just walked in with Sophie carrying a store-bought cake. "Oh, my angel," she squealed, scooping him into a hug as though she hadn't seen him in years, though she babysat him every other week. I saw Ella's smile falter. Leo blinked and whispered to me. She didn't even say thank you. The evening passed in a haze of subtle wounds. Every word from Aiden was brilliant. Every small accident of his was brushed aside as charming. When he spilled soda across the couch, my father chuckled and said, "That's what boys do." Later, when Leo accidentally knocked a coaster to the floor, my father's voice sharpened. "Can't you be more careful?" At dinner, Aiden laughed at Ella for not knowing how to play chess. "Even babies know that," he said, his tone smug. I leaned forward, my voice even. "Mom, Dad, could you please ask him to be kinder?" My mother sipped her wine. "Kids tease. Don't make a scene, Martha." That night I tucked the kids into bed, kissed their foreheads, and lay in my room listening to the slow tick of the wall clock. My chest felt tight, my eyes stung, but I told myself it was just one bad day. In the morning I would try again. The next day, I left for half an hour to pick up Ella's allergy medicine from the local pharmacy. When I returned, the sight that met me stole my breath. Ella and Leo were sitting on the porch with their small suitcases beside them. Leo's cheeks were wet. "Grandpa said we have to go," he said. I dropped my purse and crouched down. "Why?" "He said we were being disruptive and Aiden needed quiet." I could hear the break in his voice. I stormed inside, my steps sharp on the hardwood floor. "Dad, what is going on?" He didn't look up from his newspaper. "Your kids were too loud. Aiden has testing next week. He needs peace." "They're children," I said, my voice shaking. My mother stepped in. "Aiden is gifted. He needs stability to thrive." My pulse pounded in my ears. "So you threw my children out?" My mother rolled her eyes. "You're overreacting." Something inside me shifted. The woman who had bent herself into knots to keep the peace was gone. I gathered my kids, loaded the car, and drove away. The silence in the car was heavy, their faces pale and drawn. I saw in them the beginnings of doubt, the kind that takes root and grows if you are not careful. I would not let it grow. What my parents didn't know was that 6 months earlier, I had inherited Daniel's shares in his tech startup after a long legal battle. The company's valuation was in the millions. I had been living quietly, not telling anyone because I wanted peace. That weekend had shown me that peace bought with silence was worthless. I bought a house in a gated community. It had high ceilings, a sunlit kitchen, and a garden where Ella could grow her flowers and Leo could paint without worrying about mess. I enrolled them in a private school that prioritized emotional well-being. I found a child therapist to help them navigate their grief and the sting of rejection. Slowly, I began to see the light return to their eyes. 2 months later, I hosted a back-to-school celebration and invited my extended family. I worded the invitations so they sounded modest, not revealing the new house or what I had done with my life. When my parents and Sophie arrived, my mother's jaw dropped. "Whose house is this?" "Mine," I said, smiling. She blinked. "You bought this?" "Yes, with a portion of the business money I inherited. I didn't tell anyone because I knew how you might react." The day was filled with laughter and music. Ella played violin for our guests. Leo gave a tour of his small art gallery in the sunroom. After the performances, I stood up to speak. "Many of you have seen my children grow, grieve, and heal. Not all of you have treated them fairly." I let my gaze settle on my parents. I was told my kids were disruptive, not as special, and asked to leave a home for simply being children. That broke something in me, but it also lit a fire. I used to think being quiet protected my kids. Now I know speaking up does. I turned to Ella and Leo. "You are my pride, and no one will make you feel small again." Then I announced that I had created a trust for them, securing everything I owned for their future. My parents' faces went pale. They left early without a word. In the days that followed, I felt lighter. I was at the grocery store one evening when I heard a voice behind me. "Martha Hayes. It's been a long time." I turned and saw a man I didn't recognize at first, tall with dark hair and eyes that seemed to study me as though measuring my reaction. He introduced himself as Ethan Ward, the new director of a local youth outreach program. He had read about my contributions to the school and community in a local paper and wanted to thank me personally. We spoke for a while, and there was an ease to it, as though he had been a missing piece I hadn't realized I was looking for. Ethan began appearing in small parts of my life. He volunteered at the school, helped organize an art show where Leo's work was displayed, and attended a fundraiser where Ella performed. We grew close quickly. He was kind, attentive, and spoke to my children with the same respect he showed me. For the first time since Daniel's death, I felt the flicker of something I thought I had buried. Hope for a future that wasn't just about surviving. One evening after a community meeting, Ethan walked me to my car. "You've been through a lot, Martha," he said softly. "You deserve people who stand beside you no matter what." His words lingered with me long after he left. But as our connection grew, strange things began to happen. I noticed a black sedan parked near my house more than once. Anonymous messages appeared in my mailbox, each one containing a single line about my children's safety. I told myself it was a coincidence, but deep down I knew it wasn't. By the time I realized the danger, it was already close. The first note was unsettling but vague. A single sheet of paper folded neatly, placed inside my mailbox without an envelope. It read, "Keep them safe." The handwriting was blocky, the kind you could disguise easily. I stared at it in my kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly loud in my ears. I didn't want to alarm Ella and Leo, so I tucked it into a drawer, telling myself it was just some sick prank. But when the second note came 2 days later, there was no denying the threat. This one read, "They are watching." The word "they" was underlined twice. I decided to call Ethan. His voice was calm but concerned. He came over that evening, taking the notes and reading them slowly. "You should file a police report," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. I agreed, though a part of me feared what official involvement might stir up. I had tried for months to build a life far away from the judgment and cruelty of my parents, but now I wondered if they had found a way back in. The officer who came to my home was polite but non-committal. He said they would keep an eye out, suggested I install security cameras, and told me to call if anything else happened. It was the kind of reassurance that didn't reassure at all. Ethan stayed that night, helping me set up a camera by the front door and another in the backyard. His presence calmed me, and as I watched him tighten the last screw under the porch light, I felt a warmth spread through me that wasn't just relief. The next week passed without incident, but I found myself scanning the street every time I left the house. At night, I double-checked the locks and kept my phone within reach. Ethan and I grew closer, our conversations deepening, our time together more frequent. One night, over dinner, he told me about his younger sister who had been bullied so badly in school that she developed severe anxiety. "That's why I do what I do now," he said. "No child should feel unsafe in their own home or their skin." I reached across the table and took his hand. "That's why I protect mine with everything I have," I replied. His eyes softened, and in that moment I knew I could trust him, or at least I wanted to believe I could. Then the third note came. It was waiting on my car's windshield when I left the grocery store. This one had no words, only a photograph. It showed Ella and Leo walking home from school, their backpacks slung over their shoulders. My stomach turned to ice. The image had been taken from a distance, but close enough to capture their faces. I called Ethan, my voice shaking. He was at my house in minutes. "This changes everything," he said. "We need to find out who's behind this." I asked if he thought it could be my parents. His expression tightened. "I don't know, but whoever it is knows your routine and where your kids are. That's dangerous." That night, Ethan stayed again, sleeping on the couch. Around 2 a.m, I woke to a noise outside. I crept to the window and saw a figure standing at the edge of the driveway. The porch light didn't reach that far, and the person's face was obscured by a hood. My pulse roared in my ears. I reached for my phone, but before I could dial, the figure turned and walked away. The police took the footage from the security camera the next day, but the hooded figure had kept their head down, making identification impossible. Ethan suggested I keep the kids home from school for a few days. We set up a small art corner for Leo and a reading nook for Ella, trying to make the sudden confinement feel less like a cage. It was during those long days at home that I realized how much I had come to depend on Ethan's presence. He cooked dinner, helped Ella practice her violin, and listened to Leo explain the meaning behind each of his paintings. He never made me feel like a burden. But I also began to notice small things that didn't fit. Once, when he thought I wasn't looking, he checked his phone and quickly slipped it back into his pocket when I walked into the room. Another time, I caught him standing in my office, looking at a framed photo of Daniel and me. His face was unreadable. When I asked if he was okay, he smiled and said he was just curious about my late husband's work. On the fourth night, I woke to the sound of footsteps on the porch. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept in my closet and moved quietly through the darkened hallway. Ethan appeared from the living room, his eyes wide but alert. Together we flung open the front door. The porch was empty, but there was a package sitting on the welcome mat. Inside was a single item, a chess piece, a white queen. Underneath it was a note in the same blocky handwriting. "You are protecting the wrong king." I stared at it, my mind scrambling for meaning. Ethan took the piece from my hand, turning it over. "This is a warning," he said. "But from who?" The next morning I decided I needed answers. I drove to my parents' house without telling Ethan. My father answered the door, his expression shifting from surprise to irritation. "What are you doing here?" he asked. I told him about the notes, the photos, and the figure in the driveway. He listened without much reaction. "You're being dramatic," he said. My mother appeared behind him. "Maybe this is what happens when you flaunt your new life." Their words were cold, but their eyes gave away something else, a flicker of recognition quickly hidden. I left with my heart pounding, more certain than ever that they knew more than they were saying. That night, Ethan noticed my mood and pressed me for details. When I told him where I had been, his jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have gone alone," he said. "It's not safe." His protectiveness was comforting, but also unsettling in its intensity. 2 days later, the truth began to surface. I received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was low, distorted. "He's not who you think he is. Check his past." The line went dead before I could respond. My hands trembled as I set the phone down. That evening, I asked Ethan directly about his life before coming here. He hesitated, then said he had worked in corporate security but left after a disagreement with his employer. Something in his tone felt rehearsed. I wanted to believe him, but doubt had begun to take root. Later, after he left for the night, I searched his name online. At first, nothing unusual came up. Then I found an old news article about a whistleblower in a high-profile corporate fraud case. The article mentioned that the whistleblower's identity had never been confirmed, but one of the suspects in leaking sensitive data was Ethan Ward. The case had never gone to trial. Before I could process what this meant, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was another photograph, this time of Ethan and my children, taken earlier that day in my backyard. My breath caught. Whoever was behind this was closer than I had ever imagined. And they were not finished. The city felt different now. Brighter, louder, alive. I stood on the same street where I'd once waited for my parents to pick me up after school, back when I still believed they cared. That version of me was gone. Behind me, the cafe I now co-owned with Daniel buzzed with customers. The sign above the door, "Second Chances," was more than a name. It was a declaration. I'd confronted my parents months ago, not for an apology, they didn't have one, but to tell them they no longer had power over me. I walked out of that meeting lighter than I'd ever felt. Daniel had become more than a friend. He was my anchor in storms I didn't see coming, the reminder that love, real love, builds, not breaks. As I locked eyes with a young woman walking past, carrying a suitcase and wearing the same lost expression I once had, I smiled at her. "Need a place to start?" I asked, holding the cafe door open. Sometimes the best revenge isn't rage. It's thriving so loudly they have to hear it. And I was done whispering.